All right.
Okay, I just saw it. Yeah.
Time zones.
All right, we
Still have to
are
be
live.
documentation about midnight, because if people run their scheduled tests at midnight or around midnight, that would be a problem.
Well, I guess it's like any time zone thing, huh? It's not really about whether it's, you don't necessarily know that
Well,
it'll be midnight.
but we can fix it as long as the problem isn't midnight. But if the problem is midnight, we can't fix that problem.
Well, it's because it's a problem. I guess it is a problem. It is a thing that will happen in DocuSign. People are filling out your forms on midnight and they rely on some specific date. It will just break
Sure.
halfway through.
But then it should always break, like if the tests are trying to catch that, then that is something that should always break. Right? Like if
Well,
that's
It's
a,
less of that's a thing you can test for, and that's just how the program will work.
yeah,
like-
but I mean, like, yeah. If it was gonna fail sometimes, it should ideally be able to detect that it would fail consistently. And we're not living in an ideal world, I understand, I'm just saying.
Okay, that's right.
They just, I guess, if we're talking about it, let's put on the agenda.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Choose time, date,
Yeah,
they run UTC. So you made a fix to handle like the scenario that Caroline specifically ran into and left them at midnight.
no,
Or-
we made an issue, it wasn't about midnight.
Issue. There's no fix. Okay.
Well,
I
kind
mean,
of
it's
about
an
midnight.
issue about, I guess it's kind of about midnight.
It's not yet.
If you wanna
to-
go into
trying to
rights, you
describe
can, but
This, well, we were talking about it, so we might as well write it down.
yeah,
Sure, yeah.
So the way I understood the issue was she had a test where it's like subtract a day, but the day was different than she expected because it was running on UTC time and she was in Alaska time.
yeah.
Yes.
So, and actually, I guess that shouldn't matter, except the date was different in the two places. They weren't matching.
Yes.
The
So
front
like
end was different from the server's time.
yes.
Well,
and so
even, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, you can go ahead, Michelle. You probably would.
I was just gonna say, yes, but it would be still a problem if a user is using the interview and the date crosses midnight while they're filling out the interview. So, but
okay.
that's like,
All right.
That's what
If the
I'm
time you
saying.
start the test is not the same as the time the test ends, basically, if you have a test that takes 20 minutes or even
yeah.
2 minutes, I guess.
So I guess in ALKiln, what we could possibly do is warn the developer by saying a warning that says whenever they use the time value, that says if your test depends on a time, then just be aware that this can break for your users. So that
Well, a
that
day
could be
really.
something that's something we could do in the, yeah, that's something we could do in the
Is
story.
this
fix.
specific
Yes.
case fixed? I know there's a new edge case we were thinking about from this deep dive. And now the times are going to be matching the front end, like the time that the server thinks it is and the time that
It is not yet
No one thinks
fixed.
it is. It's not yet fixed, but it
The-
can be.
It can be.
Yeah,
Again,
but
there's
it's
a GitHub there's like an action that we can run that will set the UTC time on the GitHub action runner correctly. We could just let people hard code that to be the same, like in their action, they just have to write like pass in like what time zone is this sort of thing, which is, yeah, there's benefits of that. And the alternative is trying, which I think Michelle mentioned earlier, is trying to somehow query the DocuSign server and figure out what its time zone is automatically, which would be nice.
that would be a pretty nice thing. I'm guessing
But
there's
I just
not
don't know if that's a
right
thing
for
we
that.
can do.
There's no
Well,
endpoint yet for that, for querying the time zone of the server. I guess you can get the whole config. So you could see the server config.
Which I would not like that, because that's a whole lot of secrets.
yeah,
But
not ideal.
that is the idea, I guess. I don't know if maybe there's something in the web page. Is there anything? in
Oh,
it?
I would have,
Maybe
I
not,
would have
but-
thought that like. I would have thought that wherever the. Website was running, which I guess would be the GitHub server. That's right, so yes, there's a way. There is a way. Bryce sounds like he knows, like,
Specific action.
he has a much more specific idea of what to do than I have,
I-
but there is a way.
There's a way to set it on GitHub. I don't know if there's a way to get the time zone from DocAssemble.
That's the part that I was.
Okay, making sure that we're
Yeah.
clarified. I don't know that.
Okay,
Okay.
yes.
That might be a
Um,
useful endpoint to just add an API for in DocAssemble. Not super urgent, but it might be nice
Yeah,
It
it
might
would,
to be able to say what time zone are you in.
yeah.
The time zone is the server in. Yeah, so the other thing that came up in this conversation was just that this is always going to be a problem. I mean, we want AleKiln to have the same problem that users have anyway. Which might actually mean not changing the time zone for that matter, because that's a user problem, but that's not the way the problem should come up in AleKiln. But that this is always going to be a problem for users, and so what do we do about that as a testing framework that is supposed to tell you the weaknesses of your system?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you just can't really fix the fact that sometimes tests will go into one day. I was a little surprised that that was the test that Caroline chose, because I don't know that it's so helpful
And
to
also
have
to
like the
be,
day boundary.
to be clear, I think she fixed it by like bumping it back an extra
A
day.
day, yeah, like
so
it's fairly easy to do.
It's not
usually.
going, like, yeah, we can for certain say things are not going to run for 24 hours. And so it won't ever be the case that someone starts it on one day and then it finishes 2 days later. Like,
Mhm.
that's just not
Yeah.
gonna happen for Kiln stuff. And so,
And I was thinking how I would write that test, and I feel like that's perfectly valid for simulating real user input for like the scenario she was.
We could just document it. I mean, that's a solution. I'd rather
I think
have
documenting
something
is
a
not a
bit
bad
more
idea.
robust. But I mean, we should also document it because it could go over
Yeah.
midnight anyway. And the and people being aware that when they schedule their tests, if they're doing scheduled tests that cross midnight, that in particular could be a problem in that kind of situation. So we should definitely document it. But so it's probably not an urgent fix because it's just such a anyway. But so what the idea I had just during this discussion was that we could at least give developers a warning that this is potentially a problem for them because they have date.
Yeah,
dependent
I think that's fine.
questions.
I mean, it's like a general issue about testing stuff, right? It's not
Yeah.
specific to our system in any way.
Yeah.
At all. But we can still say it so people know when
Yeah.
it's there, because people might be totally new to using tests who use our system.
Exactly. And not just that, people might be totally new to writing code for time zones and they just might not be aware of that concept in general.
We should just be aware of the scope of that documentation to make
Yeah.
sure we're like, okay, say enough to hint at the issue, because you might be new to this. This might be your first time doing it, but yeah, we can't necessarily.
Do you think it's worth adding a warning in the report?
If the
Anybody?
time changes,
on that?
if the day changes, that might be really helpful
Um,
debug information. Test finished on a different day than it started.
Yeah, but also in general, just to let people know.
No,
No.
only when it's actually something that changes information in the test. I mean, we don't have to like go down and parse it to see, oh, did you have any date calculations? But if you do want to include that the day is different from the ending to the start, that feels like really helpful for the debug log.
May be able to do that.
But it doesn't seem so important, to be honest. But
And that'll only be useful if and when we can set the server date to the client date. I mean, set the client date to the server date, so. But.
Yeah. All right, that's good. I mean, this was a good thing to fix. It discover and think through. Not so urgent, I think, just given the fact that we could just change the test to get around it. But I do like the fact that we discovered that the front end time was different, and that's definitely good to fix. It feels like end-to-end tests aren't where you hope to discover things that are like right on a date boundary.
Yeah,
To me.
that's the thing.
Because a user is not going to run into that probably with their real data.
Well,
If they do,
think
it's
they
less of an
would.
issue, because I think the times that it would happen are default dates and JavaScript like validation for a date of like, oh, you can't fill this in because it's like too long ago or something.
Right.
And
I think it could have results on, I mean, they could have,
Let's say a user is
different
filling in this interview
results.
for real, and it's like you have a statute of limitations, and when they're in the middle of using it, the date changes. They're still subject to that statute of limitations, right?
right, but
Because they're not
the
going to be able to
interview
file it
won't
until they finish the
correctly,
interview.
but the interview won't work correctly to tell them that. Unless developers put the calculation right at the end as opposed to like on the final screen as opposed to in the middle as a kickout, right?
But this is talking about validation. So like we're saying, we're going to say something's an invalid date. That won't be wrong. I suppose you're right. Someone could finish it, but that's still possible if they've waited to file it for 2 days just because they finished the interview, right? So if they're right on the boundaries, they may have those problems, but I don't think they're not going to be form filling issues as much. I mean, I think maybe it's good. This is a good lesson to say, hey, if there's a date boundary and it's important to the validity of the person's case, you should say it in words, and then users can understand it. If they're relying on the date validation to be like within 1 day of a window, then that's a risk that we probably can't change the real world circumstances that led them to that. And it may be better to err on the side of letting them file something other than not.
Yeah. Mm.
I just assume it's something that you need to do by communicating with the user. But maybe there might be some edges, but who knows? But we don't have to try to solve them all in the test code for sure.
Yeah, but that would be a good bit to add to the documentation as well, to say,
Yeah.
hey, let your user know, because you don't know
But do
when
you want to
they'll
like have
actually be
your
filing it.
Yeah, that's fair. Probably not in the Kiln documentation. I don't think that's where that would go. It's more in our how to write good
Okay.
questions documentation.
Okay. I'll,
And we have a little stuff there about validation, not a lot, but we should probably continue to expand that.
I'd love to link to that then from the ALKiln documentation.
Sure. What do we have? It's not that much. I think we basically say it's hard to do validation. But we should probably add something here that says if you're doing validation, explain limits and boundaries in words too, because your user might run into an edge case.
And I think specifically giving an example of a date will make it more concrete for people.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about it, like I would not want to have server resources used to test that boundary like in a 20-minute end-to-end test every time it doesn't feel super. That's not the test case
I
I
mean,
would write.
it's not really resources that
cases.
I'm worried about. It's more mental noise, like,
Yeah.
of, like, what are you paying attention to in the report? Like,
Right, it's not
gonna
server
take that
resources.
many
We're not paying
more
for this.
resources. Yeah.
Well, every test takes 5 to 10 minutes, and that's not irrelevant if we were having to pay for it, but we don't. Yeah.
But
okay.
what
So,
I mean, it wouldn't try to wait till the date boundary. It would just give a warning. We're not going to wait for a date boundary.
I think this is all we need for the date boundary stuff, is that warning log if the date actually changes in the middle of the test.
Mhm.
Okay, so I wanted to point out, I just split this file into two. So I archived all the notes from before the summer because it was significantly
Okay.
lagging when we edited this file. So that's just
Sure.
more of an announcement, not too much to say.
Yeah.
I think that the impounded address feature, all the feedback was the API made sense as long as they could change the phrasing. Is there any other blockers to merging that? Because we do have some important fixes to get merged with the assembly line repo. So I was trying to figure out if we should wait to merge that before bumping
It
the
makes
version
sense
number.
to, I feel like it makes sense to release the fixes we've merged so far before focusing on merging this one and releasing it too, but.
Oh, yeah, that's fair, because this is a feature.
yes.
Just that we don't have so many releases, but maybe you're right. Maybe those could be separate releases. It's hard to install a particular version.
Yes.
I suppose not if it's on PyPI. What's the feeling like? This is. I don't think we're going to get any more information out of the
Partners.
day crew. Yeah. So is there other review folks want to do?
I don't think I specifically got a chance to review it yet.
Okay.
But I also probably don't need to per se. So. I looked over the code, I just hadn't gotten a chance to use it. Which TBH I probably won't get to this week. So if you just want to speak this week.
Okay. No, I think it was good to try this out, and I think this isn't like this kind of feature is not urgent to merge, but you know, just like diverging features that we never. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and merge this, and then I'll bump the version and do a release this afternoon, likely. Q9A, that was a rabbit hole this weekend. So it looked like there was a very simple issue, which I don't know how that was happening, but I do know that we can fix it. Were you able to reproduce this error 99, this issue?
No.
I don't know what circumstances would have triggered.
I did have everything running in a local version that I like just tested that the amendment worked. I didn't go back to an earlier version and tested that I would break it. I could still do that.
Okay. Well, when I started trying to debug this, I found out that the 209A doesn't work with the latest version of the assembly line or with the latest version of DocAssemble. So there were two other, that's why this pull request ended up getting bigger, because I couldn't, the test wouldn't pass after this simple change, which definitely fixed this issue. Because it was broken in other ways. So one was the language function was looking for a file that didn't exist, so I had to make a patch in assembly line to get around that issue. I think the only other interview that uses the language.py from DocAssemble is up to code, so I'll fix that as well. And I think it's the consequence of not fixing it is that the language button doesn't work, so you can't switch language. It's not an error message for folks, at least with the patched version of assembly line.
That actually brings up a really good question for ALKiln, because we are doing languages differently now. And they
You
won't
cut out a
catch-
little bit for me, Michelle.
Oh, the ALKiln wouldn't catch a bug like that unless people specifically pressed on the language button, like with a manual ID or something like that.
No, it would have caught the error in that I first found, which was that it was trying to load and it was getting a server a 500 error. That's how I saw it from looking at the Kiln test.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. I
But
thought you said that
the
it was just
leftover
the
behavior
button wasn't.
caught. Yeah, you'd have to run the
Okay.
interview to see that the language switcher didn't work.
Okay, got it. Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Since it's just
It
one
won't catch
interview to change, I
buttons
think
like
that's the
that.
right.
But,
And then the other thing is the new language method expects you to have the switcher in the toolbar, but the escape.py, the custom escape stuff we had here in the 209A, like our first draft of that, it just overwrote the whole navigation bar. So I couldn't just, there was no compatible way to keep that way of doing it.
Okay, that explains why I don't think I saw any of your old or any of these.
I
these
added
comments
this
when I was.
after I saw your question.
Okay.
So that wasn't there. It just said fixed 99 before.
I
Okay.
mean, we can try and switch to the old version of the escape button. There just seems to be no ideal way. Do we think an escape
The
button
old
would be
version is the one
something-
that was
No,
broken because it overwrites the navigation bar. So
Oh, I
switching
see.
to the new one was required to get it to work still
Got it.
with the language switcher.
Okay.
So it
Well,
is not
good.
like so ideal. But I think
At least there's something that works. I guess.
so. I saw you open up this issue about. Oh, you're saying
Yes.
there's no enclosing
It's not
UL?
contained anymore.
Yeah, and I
thought
actually
there
maybe I
was.
should check. Maybe I should check in another one, but there's wasn't for me.
Okay.
I can pull it
That
up
was
again.
why we did it this way, because it was in a UL. But okay.
Well, so I think it looked like it historically it maybe was, but there was
Okay.
I didn't get to like test everything, but at one point, like maybe a year or so ago, y'all made a change that made it still show when the screen gets too small, because otherwise DocuSimple just collapses it under the drop down.
Mhm.
And it's not actually visible on mobile. And so I think when we took it out, I think it was still just using a list. Or it's still in a list item when it gets moved from it still gets added directly to the navigation, I think, but then there's some JS that literally just takes it from there and moves it into the main nav bar. And so it doesn't collapse.
Hmm.
I have it.
Okay.
I have it up here right now if you want me to screen share and like show, but yeah, it's mostly.
I mean, I believe you. Like,
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
believe you too. Okay, so I guess it's a fix to the toolbox to change that, so it's just in a div rather than an li.
Yeah, I think
well,
that's the
it
best
needs to
fix.
sometimes be in an li and sometimes be in div.
It's whether or not
Is that
it's
right?
large or small, the screen is large or small, it is still an ALI that is not listed in a list anywhere, or that's not in a list
Okay.
anywhere. Because I think we're
All right.
moving it whether or not the screen is small. I don't know if that's
Okay.
intentional, but yeah.
I didn't realize that change had happened. I think we were at that point. The reason to do that was so we could use it in the 209A. So I'm surprised we didn't already switch it. But okay, I don't remember if there was a reason for that or who made that choice. It probably maybe was just like worked on totally independently.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I actually don't think that the original issue 99 was one I'd ever run into before.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it's urgent to upgrade this, but now to get these fixes in, it is a bigger scope change and it requires bumping up the version of assembly line.
Yeah.
So hard to tell if it's urgent or not to install it.
It shows up fairly often in the production.
Oh,
errors.
okay.
So
Great. We just were having a broken 209A for a while. I don't understand why that error started happening. I think, is it only in older sessions, possibly? I wonder. You might not have opened up any of the sessions to try to figure it out, which is fair.
yeah.
because I think this is set properly in the defaults. So I think it's like basically if there was a session that didn't instantiate the defaults, that happened.
We do have a lot of those. But
So specifically, page 2 attachment. Because it's only when there's an overflow, so maybe we hadn't tested that recently enough.
the most recent time it happened was, I guess, not as much as I thought it was. Most recent time it happened was in August, like late August, and then before that, April. So it's not like every time someone does it, you're right, but it is often.
Okay. And you were asking if we should make that fix upstream. I think when someone has, I think this is just in a patch kind of scenario here. Because I think that this overflow message is usually defined in the attachment block or in the AL document initialization object block. But is there any harm in having that default? Don't know. So you see here, it's like in the attachments is where it's normally defined.
Okay.
And that should work. So seems to be in the page 2 attachment. So I was a little confused as to how that was getting triggered. But maybe
If it's, yeah, like you said, if it already existed and then someone,
revisited a really old session, maybe.
yeah,
Potentially. But then like having it defined not in the object block is a workaround for that scenario. So the question is like, should we also have that extra safety somehow in the
In a different block?
yeah.
Sure, why not?
But I thought we had some overflow safety. We have default overflow message. So it should be looking for that default overflow message, which is already defined. Nothing's referring to overflow message on its own that I can see in AL document. So it might just be an error inside a particular attachment.
okay.
Where it's directly referencing that value.
Yeah.
It's not really supposed to be.
That would make sense. And I guess I'm okay with that. If it's a attachment specific thing, if it's just in that package, it doesn't make sense to move it back upstream if it's only a thing that's people are gonna have to add in their own addendum blocks.
I think so. I think, yeah, in the actual
If it's in our default addendum,
I can
right?
check that.
Search isn't gonna pull that up, is
No,
what I'm
you're-
realizing.
I don't think so, because I think, well, the 209A, that's all uses custom addenda, because that was our model for the rest of the addendum code.
You're
But
right.
it changed a lot. Like that was our first interview with addenda.
Okay.
But I'll look at it. Anyway. So you're quite right. Worth checking. So the Weaver generates interviews with that default overflow message set in them,
Mhm.
but people could handwrite their interview and not think or know that that's an important attribute to set.
Mhm. It does look like default overflow message is what's used in the basic addendum. Yeah, at the bottom.
Okay,
Which we have that set in assembly line, which should be fine.
although maybe that's wrong because it should be the actual overflow message. But I don't know. I'm not sure how helpful this addendum is.
It is what people start with, right?
People
it
start
not?
and customize it. I think we should
I
probably
would
have
start with this if
separate customizing.
yeah.
Well, it's like so generic. It's like loop over all of the rows and get all of the attributes of every object. Like that's
Mhm.
if you wanted to actually customize it, you have to undo all of that.
I see. Okay.
For now. Okay, I'll write it down somewhere. Okay, so that's a totally different issue, I guess, but okay, so I think ready to merge this. Does that seem right? And I don't know if it's ready to install on the production server yet, because it requires upgrading the assembly line for everybody too.
Yeah.
But
We should
probably
update.
we don't have to
note-
just rush that. That's all. We don't have to do it today.
That's great. I was gonna say we can note that in the requirements of like which AL version it needs, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can do that once we bump the version.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, do we want to upgrade to get this addendum thing in? But if we haven't seen the error since August, I don't know. I think we'll just try to get this done this week and do the upgrade of the server, but not try to rush it today when we're not necessarily paying enough attention to it. Okay. Here was an issue. This was like a really annoying rabbit hole because, in part, I couldn't see what the error message was without running.
Yeah, this one's been raw.
So, I opened an issue for this. I don't know if everyone saw it. We're getting error screen snapshots now for Kiln if they're using our default custom error message. Sorry.
I've been thinking about this
anymore.
Yeah. My thought, yeah, sorry, I've been thinking about this because I've noticed this for a while and just haven't had the time to go into it, and is one of the slight reasons I use Kiln less and less. But My
Yeah,
thoughts on
the-
it is that we want the whole HTML of the page sometimes. Like, sometimes
Oh,
I
yeah.
want to know what the selectable options were on a page. And you can't get that from a screenshot. You just get, oh, it didn't fill in this option. And so I feel like the screenshots are still helpful and useful, but you want the whole HTML of the page. And so I think you should just download that and save it along with it, the screenshot.
Good idea.
What do you think, Michelle?
yeah, whole HTML. I think that's gonna be a more complete solution than just, you know, edge casing it one case at a time, saying, click on technical information and take the whole screenshot of that, like,
Yeah.
because this may change, lots of things.
There is another option, which is we could just always show the full debug log when you're on the debug server. Because actually my students don't click technical information ever, so they give me really useless reports
Yeah, a
too.
lot of people don't look at the technical information. But yeah, and people should be running it on their dev servers anyway, or their test servers. Their test servers might not have debug on.
That's true. We don't actually have that on our test
Yeah.
server.
It goes back and forth. Sometimes we have it on, but then sometimes it's like, oh, we're letting Tyler test things on our test server. So turn it back off because they're going to be confused about what the red text. So
Yeah.
it goes back and forth.
I wonder if we should
But
change the. Okay, let me write.
Yeah,
down
sorry,
some
that's a
things.
different issue, but
Yeah.
Yeah. I suggest not printing the HTML in the report though. I suggest putting it where the screenshots are.
yes,
Like,
no,
just
Yeah,
agreed.
of course.
individual
You don't want like an
scenarios.
extra 3,000 lines every error in
Just
the
making sure
log.
we're on the same page. Yeah, the assembly line, the error message is not logging, definitely. Something that's been in the queue. I like this idea about saving the whole HTML of the page. So some things we just have to be careful, especially with our own things that we add, but some things are not on the page. They're added dynamically at a different time. So
Could you just download
letting you
the
know.
contents of the DOM rather than download? We're not like doing a wget anyway. That doesn't work for DocAssembly.
That's what I
so-
mean. Yeah.
It'll be the contents of the DOM, but sometimes the contents of the DOM is affected by JavaScript, and that's how things, they take away elements, they add elements. And so what's on the screen may not be everything that could be on the screen, is all I'm saying.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, that's
Okay.
we're saying we want a screenshot on steroids, and that's what we would get. We'd be like, here's the current
Yeah.
state of the DOM.
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
actually see all of it without it being cut off or
Yeah.
collapsed.
It doesn't have to be interactable, but it is a thing. That's like my personal debugging thing would be if something happened weird on a screen, I would just like inspect element and look through like what the current DOM looks like on the screen in the browser tools. And that's sort of what I would
Want to be able to do.
want from this. Yeah. So I think that's fine if it doesn't always change or it's slightly different or whatever. So
So I do like this idea. I think that's going to be really helpful to improve
Yeah, awesome. Bryce.
debugging with Kiln. So I'm going to give it a check because we finished discussing that part of it at least. But this did give me two other ideas, which also address part of the problem, and we could probably implement as quickly as the other fix. Should we just show the full error message on development servers? I feel like that's fair. We started that
Yeah,
discussion.
That would be great. Like
Thanks,
people are
agree.
like, it
Not
is
collapse it,
frustrating.
show it open by default.
I mean, there are
Or
pros and
maybe not the
cons.
full error trace.
It's easier to press back when the full error trace isn't there, but but
Right, because there's no back in the top button. But we could just show the abbreviated version we show in production, which doesn't have the full trace. It just shows the most significant part of the error.
maybe
So it could be a compromise.
as long as the rest of it was there to be looked at if it was desired. So like it is still present, because not having the full error message. Our idea of what's significant isn't, like, any idea of what's significant isn't always the correct one. But it's okay. I think it's okay if it's a bit harder to click the back button. I wish you could see variables and values on that page too. That's one of the things that
So hard to know
bugs
what's
me
relevant.
about
There's
both
so many
pair of
irrelevant
screens. Yeah.
variables and values. You
I
can
just-
click the show variables and values button.
Does it apply to the current interview, or is it separate from, is it divorced from the current interview?
Well, the show variables and values button is always one step off, which is annoying, but still sometimes helpful to see.
Okay.
So you added this in, okay. Okay, that's another idea, I guess. Should we show?
Well, if you can see it by hitting the source button, I don't think so.
There still might be some value to it because it's when that's not so discoverable for students.
Okay.
And there are ways for us to do that.
You could do we could have a show variables and values button, right? And just do it the way
Yeah.
DocAssemble does it without actually.
That's what I
all the
mean.
Variables and
Exactly.
values. Okay.
Yeah, just
Okay.
have it.
Oh,
appear.
link. Sorry, I missed that. So wasn't looking at the.
And another thought was, the reason we keep debug turned off on our test server is when we want to show it to test users. Should we just never show the HUD to test users? Or is that not what we really were expecting? Because we have different kinds of test users, don't we? We have ones that we're saying, hey, you're our tester, run through the interview, record yourself and show us what's wrong. We do want the HUD for that scenario.
I will say, I think a couple times people have said, like, non-technical testers have been like, you shouldn't show this stuff at the top of the screen.
I don't really understand why people think that we're showing that to everybody on purpose on a production server. Feels like context should make it clear that that's not happening.
Users are users. That's how users do. But so I'm just saying that sometimes people do find it confusing. But it's, I mean, if it's just testers that find it confusing, I don't think that's crucial. I think they can get over that and they still give good feedback, you know. I don't think that's
right. They just give one piece of feedback that we don't need to hear.
Yeah,
and that's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Well, another option, another refinement for this is we have a special role for people to use where we don't want them to see that. That requires creating an account for folks, either where we do or we don't want to see that information for folks.
Okay. I don't know. I don't think it's worth the complexity necessarily. But could think about it.
Certainly is easier to just give people a link and say, just run this link and not tell them anything about accounts they need to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. It was a random idea that popped in my head. I guess that's why I didn't have the random idea before. Okay. So we're not going to do anything with this idea. Just yeah. But this maybe is still worth exploring. I do think the reasons to hide it. We already are not showing stuff on the production server, but maybe we want to show more on the development server expanded. Because yeah, students don't have to figure it out. So, but it wouldn't solve the problem on Kiln test because we don't know what the status of the server is going to be at different points.
Yeah. I mean, if we could give the Tyler people a user role that was consistent, that might be a useful way to use that. But not for individual testers, I don't think.
I guess we could have a parameter that's like HUD equals false or something. The URL argument
Could be.
you could check for. So
Or
it's embedded in the link.
we could do a user role. Like, do they have to register as users? I guess not always.
That's the issue. The solution I think we just said we didn't like, or at least
Well,
the-
I was thinking specifically for Tyler, it might be worth making them.
a role where it's hidden rather than a role where it's visible.
Yeah, exactly.
I think giving them special links might solve that
Okay.
better than making just a few people create accounts.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. We'll link to this issue. What do people think about adding a URL arg?
Seems nice and non-invasive. In particular. So. Not any more invasive than, less invasive than other options.
Okay. Anything else anyone can think of that we should try to hit in the next
To do
couple
in
minutes?
5 minutes?
5 minutes, 4 minutes now?
No, not for me.
Okay. Great. Anything, all right, so Bryce, you'll be joining us next Monday, do you think, on these calls? Probably makes sense for stuff. We could try to change the target.
These
and
I'm not
scope.
sure about, like,
Okay.
I think it depends on, like, it's maybe I'll hop in if there are things that I need to talk about for whatever I'm doing with Suffolk. Or
Okay.
if there's specific things that I've been working on elsewhere that I'm like, hey, we should get this upstream. But I think by default, probably not.
Okay, that's fair. So probably not next Monday. We should.
Yeah, because I won't have anything like that.
And then Michelle and I guess we'll think about how to use these times, given there'll be just the two of us.
We could spend the
Those
last
weeks.
3 minutes off,
Sure.
whatever.
Stop the
Yeah.
share.